thank you for taking the time to come here.
Lance, it's nice to finally meet you.
It is. You've been here, you said for 40, you came here 40 years ago.
1982, yeah, 41 years ago, that's right. I was a student in Osaka at Kansai Gaijin, studying Asian history and Japanese language.
Okay, now I don't have to ask you where you were born. I'm pretty sure it was Colorado.
Born in Denver.
All right.
Born and raised in Denver, which was a nice place to grow up.
Right.
It's a big city now. It's 3.5 million people. A very desirable place to live.
And you're a twin?
I'm a twin.
Are you the oldest, or are you?
I beat him by 4 minutes.
By 4 minutes. I had that feeling. I figured you'd be Daniel.
So I'm the chonan here.
Okay.
First one out or last one out depends on the culture. He lives in Abu Dhabi right now, and he works for a Chinese investment entity.
And you guys still look. I don't know. I saw pictures of you when you were younger, and I think you went through a phase of long hair.
Yeah, it was
and everything.
a hippie.
Both of you, did both of you keep the hair the same way?
No, we were always a bit different. You know, it's interesting growing up as a twin.
Right.
Because there's a point at which you reach the level of sameness that's overbearing. So our parents at junior high school...
Because you're identical.
It's not only that, you've got the same friends, you're doing the same hobbies, so you're growing up doing the same thing, and there's a point at which you're going to want to separate your identities. And our parents knew that, and we went to separate high schools for that reason in Denver.
So that's when. So you went through elementary together.
And junior high.
And junior high.
That's
and then high school, your parents said, we think we better give them their own identity.
It was a good opportunity to do some separation. It was a good idea. Yeah.
And did it work? It worked.
Yeah, we're still really close, best friends. We talk every day.
Okay.
It's interesting going through life as a twin.
Now, how many years difference between you, your brother, not your brother, but between Douglas?
Younger brother. You did your homework.
Yeah.
A year and a half, so it was a rough time for my mom.
Just a year and a half?
Yeah.
So your dad didn't let her sleep much, did he?
No, I don't think so. And she was a wonderful woman. You know, she passed away 15 years ago of a terrible disease, ALS.
Oh.
And so I spent a lot of time with her toward the end, saying goodbye. It's really tough to say goodbye to someone who's like your mother, your sister, your best friend. It was very difficult.
How old were you when she passed?
Well, let's see. So I'm almost 62 now. So I was 47. It's been 15 years. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. So you're up there in age.
Yeah.
Were all your brothers there? Both of them were. Both of them.
My twin was there.
Your twin was there. What about Douglas?
Douglas was there to say goodbye a little earlier.
Okay.
Yeah. But she was a very interesting woman. She was a Holocaust survivor, and so her parents were sent to camps from Germany through France, and my grandmother apparently was separated from my grandfather, and he survived and she didn't. She was killed in a camp in a gas chamber.
Okay.
And it's a very interesting evolution of how this whole story went about. I don't know if I can take a minute to tell it.
Yeah, please do.
It's probably an unusual story from your series that you've done.
Okay.
She was possessed by surviving the Holocaust, and her life and her studies, including her PhD, was on the evolution of man and intellectual history, and how she studied about how the rise of suicide in France was linked to the governments and linked to the way in which society functioned. It was a very complicated topic. Okay. So toward the end of her life, we started doing research on the woman that rescued her in France and kept her in hiding for 4 years.
Is your mother French?
No, she's German. She was German.
She was German. Okay, that's what I wanted.
German. I don't know.
Okay,
which
I
half.
get you. Okay, yeah. That's how I go. I say her side or whatever.
Yeah. And so just a long story short, we found the woman. I wrote to Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, the Museum of the Holocaust, and got them to put her name on the Wall of the Righteous. And the interesting story, that's not even the interesting story. The interesting story was 7 years later, a researcher in France tracked her down and tracked me down and ended up writing a part of a book on my mother and her brother's story. So it's an evolution that comes full circle. You know, life comes full circle sometimes,
yes,
with unexpected things. And that just happened last year. We got this book published.
Is that right?
So,
is her brother still alive?
Yeah, he died last year.
Oh, was he younger or older?
He was older. And he spent his life in the Rocky Mountain region in his spare time talking to students around the region, teaching them about the Holocaust.
But he was there too, of course.
He was 10 miles away in a different village in France with a different family.
So he never had to go through what she went through.
He did, but
He did
they handled it differently.
I imagine so.
She wanted nothing to do with it, and he embraced it and wanted to teach people about it.
Okay.
So anyway, we don't have to spend time on it, but
That's interesting.
it's an interesting story.
Interesting. So you grew up in Colorado as a little kid. Tell me, and having a twin too, were you more academic or were you more sports-minded?
No, no sports, none of us. No, none of the football things. No, we were more academic. Yeah, we didn't do the sports
Where'd
stuff.
that come from?
No, I don't identify with soccer and football and all that.
Well, so
baseball.
as a little kid, you played and did things, right? You didn't play.
Yeah, we did, but
Your mother gave you books right away? Your dad had said, here.
we got both. My father is more of the humanist side of humanity, and my mother was more on the academic.
Now,
so
did
we
they
got a
stay-
little bit of both.
Did they stay together the whole time?
They divorced it when we were 6.
Okay.
So it was a really interesting childhood. It wasn't the American story.
She
for
never
most
married
people.
again?
She did, but
She
that
did.
ended in divorce, and she ended her quest for marriage at that point. And
Well, how old were you when that happened? How old were you when that happened?
we were like teenagers.
Okay, so you do remember him for a while. He was there for a little while.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was, both of my parents came from disadvantaged backgrounds, not only financially, but in terms of family structure. So we didn't have the kind of parents that had the kind of parents that taught them how to lead.
I understand.
And so, it's been interesting to look back as I'm older now on what is important in terms of celebrating parts of American society, like for people who believe in Christmas or Thanksgiving. Those things are not important to me. And that's part of why coming to Japan and adapting to this culture has been easy for me. I've embraced it. I fell in love with Japan the first time I came here in 1982. I felt really at home here.
Well, let's talk about how you grew up. Since it wasn't traditional, you didn't get involved in sports.
Right.
Were you very academically inclined?
More so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were really praised for reading and for studying and doing things
Yeah,
like
it was
that?
just self-discovery. A lot of parents, you're a father of kids. You've got
Yes.
4 kids, I believe.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of parents give their kids guidance as they're growing up. And you should think about being a doctor, you should think about being a lawyer, or do what you want, but if you do this might happen. My parents didn't do that.
They didn't do
gave
any
us
of that.
total freedom.
What did your father do?
So my father is still alive. He's 86. He's in great health in Denver.
Okay.
He ended up getting masters in social work, and he ended up working at the Jewish Community Center in Denver for 17 years, and then he went out on his own to make some money.
Okay.
And he did therapy and counseling, and he started studying a theory called transactional analysis. I'm okay, you're okay.
I'm familiar with it.
And also
Yes.
neurolinguistic programming,
Yes,
where you're using
yes.
eye movements
NLP.
and
Yes.
NLP and how reading other people's
Yes.
gestures and
Yes.
developing rapport with them. And he became one of the world's top specialists in the corporate side. And so he would go inside corporations and help people deal with, anger management or problem solving for
Right.
people issues.
Right.
And he worked until he was 84, 2 years ago. He was still doing it around the world.
Wow.
Traveled around the world doing
Mhm.
it. And actually, he gave us the chance to start seeing the world when we were 17, when he took us on a trip to New Zealand and Tahiti.
Okay.
And it got in our blood. And of course, the thing about, as a parent, if you introduce your kids to travel, you're risking that they may catch the travel bug and live overseas, and that's what happened to us.
course.
Most of my adult life has not been in the United States. We'll see
Wow.
them once or twice a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
But Douglas, he stayed in the States.
He stayed in the States,
He
he's in
stays.
Denver.
Yeah.
He's doing all right.
But Daniel's in Abu Dhabi.
Abu Dhabi, but he's lived in Singapore, he's lived in Manila, he's lived in Africa, he lived in China. Yeah. It all led to the opportunity to come to Japan,
Mm-hmm.
which was in 1982 through an exchange program that my father made available to us financially, right? I couldn't have done it on my own. I didn't
But tell
have
me,
the
did you have
means to
interest
do
in
it.
Japan prior to that?
No. No, there was a professor at Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado, where I was going to school, a little
Okay.
mountain school.
All right.
And he was a Japan specialist, University of Michigan. And I really liked him. I really looked up to him. And he goes, well, you should go on the exchange program that we have at the college. I said, okay. That started it.
It didn't matter.
No, but there was a guy there that I met, Mike Huffman, who also went to Fort Lewis from Denver. He ended up going to Kansai Gaidai a year before me, and he ended up studying primatology
Okay.
and studying monkeys. And the monkeys of Arashiyama, he used to go and live with them and study them. Now he teaches at Kyoto University. He's one of the top primatologists in the world. And he did his PhD thesis in Japanese.
Are you close with him? Do you know?
Not anymore.
Okay.
But fascinating, right? You meet people
Right.
and you don't know the paths they're going to go on, and you couldn't guess.
Right.
Primatology, studying monkeys, living with monkeys in the mountains of Arashiyama. Okay, go for it, man.
And that's what he's done. That's what
He's done. Yeah.
So you came over, and when you studied, what were you studying? What were you interested in?
So it was cross-culturally, I started developing an interest in Japan. Because if you look at the United States culture and Japanese culture, they're extremely different, right? There's very little overlap in a lot of areas, right? And when you start studying about cross-cultural aspects of Japan and directness and indirectness, or formality and informality, you start going deep below the surface of the iceberg and going deep into values, attitudes, and beliefs, and start learning why things are the way they are. Well, why are Japanese indirect? Well, it has to do with history. Well, what about history? Growing rice, it's a rice culture. How do you grow rice? You grow it in groups. How do you grow it in groups? You have harmony. If you don't have harmony and disharmony, nobody eats. So harmony is a core value for Japanese, right? So is avoiding conflict. So is the evolution of groupism and how groupism manifests itself. Like we can see it with COVID. Why are Japanese still wearing masks when the government is telling them not to outside, right?
They didn't say not to, they say you don't have to.
Well, but they're still doing it because of the groupthink.
Right.
Right. So the groupthink has plus and minus, just like individualism does. But I think we'd agree, and we've been gone from America for a long time, but individualism's gone amok in America, if you ask me. It's doing what I want to do all the time without enough focus on what other people
We're going to talk after.
need
We're
and
going to talk
want.
off camera about how I feel about what's happening there.
Okay.
Because I could take up the whole time.
Well, we could do that.
talking
yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
You're so correct about that. When you came over here, what did you decide to focus on? You came in '82, but how long did you stay when you came that time?
So I stayed for a semester, and then I went to school in Paris for a year. That was prearranged.
Okay, that was prearranged. So, would your father had set that up that way?
So it's interesting, again, back to my
Okay.
dad. My dad was doing consulting for a company in Greenwich, Connecticut that sent people on overseas programs to study and tours. And in lieu of his payment, he arranged for my brother and I to go to school. Daniel went to school in London, and I went to school in Paris at the same time. So he went to Richmond College, I went to the Sorbonne and the American College. And so that was another thing my father gave us, which is this opportunity to do something unique.
He didn't have other kids? He only had the three
Just
of
the
you?
three of us, yeah. Yeah. So that started, but France didn't do much for me. I studied French, and I learned French, and I studied a little bit about French culture, but it was a Western culture. I was drawn back to Japan. So after I finished undergraduate school, I went to school at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, California. And that's where I focused on Japanese policy studies.
Okay.
Because I also love political science. But then you graduate and you go, again, got to make a living. Either you go for a PhD and become a researcher, right? Or a scholar of some sort, or you do something different. And I ended up doing an internship with Fuji Xerox in 1987 in the summer between year 1 and year 2 of graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
And I went into the training world, which was where my father had come from. And I started getting hooked on it. And
wait, but
I'm going
fast. What
fast.
type of training? But what type of training?
Cross-cultural training, which was the initial link of what I liked to do in 1982.
Now, how did that link with Fuji Xerox?
Because they had a program to teach Japanese to be global, whatever that means.
I hear you, right.
And
you
prepare them for overseas assignments.
And it wasn't just teaching English.
No, it wasn't English at all.
They
it
had
was
to be able to
using
speak
English
English.
to teach the idea of
I understand.
cross-cultural adaptation.
Right.
I've never been an English teacher. I have a story about that,
Okay.
but I'll go there in a minute.
Right.
So I spent 4 years there. Then I went back to the United States for a few years. Then I didn't want to be in the States anymore. I came back in 1993 and worked for a British training company called Canning, which is still in operation here. And I stayed with them 3.5, almost 4 years. And we were doing about, let's see, how many? 200 trainings a year. And so I was getting great platform skills. And then I wasn't growing anymore, and I went out on my own. Going out on my own, as you probably know, because you've done it yourself, is in the first year you starve, right? And I realized I needed to get a formula that would allow me to pay my rent and also start having enough time to grow the way I wanted to grow. So my strategy, and what I did for over 20 years, was to get one client that would take me 10 days a month to do whatever it is that they wanted me to do, and free up 10 to 20 days a month to do what I wanted to do in the way I wanted to do it. So I was paying my rent, paying my bills, and having the free time to grow in other ways. And so one of the things I did with my free time was I started writing articles for Japanese newspapers, the Mainichi Daily News, the Daily Yomiuri. I had my own column for 2 years in each. Then I took those columns and made a book of each.
Now you're doing this in Japanese or English?
English.
Okay.
I didn't master Japanese that well. And then I took those books and I went to NHK, and I called up NHK one day. This is in 1997, 98. You know, when you make a TV show in Japan, you're supposed to go through an agent. And the agent has the connections, is supposed to do the shokai, introduce you, right? I said, oh, what ridiculous nonsense.
Unless you're a gaijin.
Yeah, and you don't have to play by the rules. And I love breaking the rules here, as long as it's legal.
That's right.
Right?
Right.
Culturally understanding what the norm is, but I know what the
right.
opportunities are, right? Japanese would never do it.
That's right.
The nail that sticks
That's
up
right.
gets hammered
Exactly.
down, right?
But you're not Japanese.
That's right. But we're not Japanese.
That's right.
So one day I called up NHK, and I got some woman on the phone, and I said, well, I've got this idea for a TV show. Who would I talk to? Hi, hi. And she transferred me to this producer. I know the show, you know, what do you want? And I said, well, here's the idea. I've got this book. I've got this idea for a TV show. Can I come talk to you? He goes, sure. We had 4 months of discussions. They gave me my own TV show. I was the host. It was #1 for 2 years. And I became famous.
Here in Japan?
Here in Japan on NHK.
Well, what?
It was
I
called
must have seen
Tayatari
it.
Ego Juku.
Okay.
But it was NHK Educational. You probably didn't watch it.
No, I probably didn't.
Because it was
I had to see
English-related based, but
Okay.
it was skill-oriented.
That is
right?
so neat.
So the thing that's interesting about this is the way in which NHK makes TV shows for educational, at least at the time when I was there,
Right.
is they've got people who write the script, and then they find the people to be the hosts and the co-hosts, and then they find the people to do the scenes with them, the scenarios with them, and then they put it together. I said, this is not the way I train. The way I train is throw you in the hot seat and see what you do.
Right.
Right?
That makes for better TV.
So I said, for example, okay, you're Japanese, you're with your wife, you arrive in New York at midnight, you have a reservation for the hotel, but you arrive late because your plane was late. You get to the hotel and the clerk says, I'm sorry, we gave your reservation away. What do you do? Japanese wouldn't know what to do. So I created these TV shows based on these kinds of scenarios. And what we did was we put an ad out for an audience. We had 700 people apply. And I said to them, look, they're standing in line. I'm going to go through 700 of them, and we're going to spend 30 seconds apiece, and I'm going to look at their skill set and how they come across as a communicator and how they look, because it's all a package.
Yes, of course.
And we took 30 to 40 people for the TV audience out of that 700, and I was the one who chose them in conjunction with the producer. They were like, okay. The producers didn't really understand what I was doing.
Right, of
They
course
just trusted me.
Okay.
Right? And until we made that first TV show, they didn't know what I was doing. So what I did was I made the scenarios first, without a script, without any of the rest of the show. Let's tape 5 set scenarios with different people coming to New York at the hotel.
I've seen it. Go on.
Yeah. So we'll take 2 of those 5, the 2 best ones, and we'll make the show around it. And so I totally upside down reversed engineered the way in which they made the TV shows. And it blossomed. And you know what happens when you're on NHK, because I went from nothing to this like Yumeijin, famous person, and stopped on the street and asked for my signature, and my wife loves your show and all that stuff, is the publishers come. And in 1 year alone, I published 5 books. And you know, ALC, PHP, DHC,
What these stand for?
Nova, these are all publishers in Japan.
Okay.
Right. And I had publisher after publisher. I had 9 publishers publishing my books, wanting to interview me and do and by the way, I brought you one of them.
Wow.
This is one that I did on leadership. I interviewed, I think it was 9 leaders, like the leader of Intel, the leader of Pfizer, the presidents at the time. This is like 20 years old.
Is that right?
Everyone can see this.
Yeah, put that up, yeah.
So this is for
Wow,
you.
thank you so
I brought you a
much.
gift.
Is it, let me see, is it in English? It's in Japanese, so what am I supposed to
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
no, yeah,
English and
English.
Japanese.
And English and
so a lot of
Japanese.
the books that we
Wow.
made were bilingual, right? Yeah.
Well, what type of book is it? What is it?
So it's a book where I'm
says
the
like,
interviewer.
okay.
I'm interviewing them on what have they learned about Japan in terms of leading people, and it's
Right.
really a book about leadership and how to motivate Japanese in a gaishike, in a foreign corporation, to be the best that they can. So
Wow.
I really have tried to do some
This is neat.
unusual, I think, sort of innovative things with some of the publishers. Now this is again 20 years ago, and it's
Right.
really hard to get books published now because
Because
everything's
it's
ebooks,
digital, right,
and
right,
everything's
right.
digitized.
Right.
So I was at a time, when I made these TV shows, the internet was in its infancy. We were still making, when we were recording for publication, we would make cassette tapes. This is 25 years ago. We were still using cassette tapes. They weren't even on DVDs.
That's right. That's right.
And now it's all streaming.
That's right.
And so the industry's completely changed.
So,
Yeah.
so what are you doing now?
So I went out, I ended my time with NHK after 2 years, which is another story. I'll tell it. It's
Okay.
an interesting
All right.
story. Because again,
We're going to have you back on for that.
I did something not Japanese. After 2 years of having a #1 TV show and being the host, they said on the 3rd year they wanted to do a new show, and they wanted me to be a co-host. And I said, well, who's the co-host? Oh, it's a Japanese guy. And I said, well, has he done TV shows? He goes, no, but he's done radio.
They wanted you to have a co-host.
Yeah, they wanted, and well, it gets interesting, right?
Okay.
Because who's the senpai, who's the kohai, who's the top guy, and who's the #2? So I said, well, okay, so let me get this straight. He's never done a TV show. I've done 2. I've been the host of 2. And well, who's the real host? And well, you're both hosts. Now, come on, who's the real host? Well, he would be because he's older than you and he's a college professor. I said, I'm not doing the show. Oh, please, Wagner-san, don't. No. You want me to go from being president to vice president.
Of my show.
I'm not going to do it.
Of my show.
I walked away from NHK. I committed NHK seppuku, honorable suicide, and that was the end of it. I said, it just doesn't work for me. I didn't do the Japanese thing. Gaman suru,
Right.
grin and bear it. I said,
But then again, there's probably a reason why. It's because you're not Japanese.
Well, but the difference is I understand how I'm supposed to do things.
But still, you're not Japanese. You can't. That's not in you.
That's right.
You just cannot do it. And honestly, it's not just about being Japanese.
Yeah.
You haven't been conditioned by this culture.
No.
In that way. Because even there's Japanese that wouldn't do it.
That's right.
In the same situation, there's Japanese that would say, no way.
There's some.
That's
some.
right.
But you and I have something called the Gaijin menkyo,
Exactly.
a foreigner license.
Most definitely.
And we use it
And use it to our
judiciously.
advantage. Most definitely.
When we want to be Japanese, we can be Japanese.
Right.
When
Most
you
definitely.
get stopped by the policeman asking you for your ID,
So,
you got
you
a
go.
choice to make.
Right.
And I've been stopped twice, actually. Like, what are you stopping me for? Do I look like a drug dealer? And I'm like, okay, look, you're doing your job,
Right.
and I'm fine. I start talking about good restaurants in the area to go.
Right.
A good place to get a hamburger.
Right.
So, but there are a lot of foreigners here that rebel against that. I said,
to
that's
their
smart.
to their demise, right? It's not good. It's just
They're
not
just
smart at
doing
all.
their job. Just play along.
And it's their country. What are you talking about? You're in their living room.
That's right.
Don't come in here with your ideas about how you want to change it the way you want it to be.
That's right.
Go home.
So now we're talking about the influence of non-Japanese in Japan, and it's at an all-time high. It was about 3% of the population, right? Something like that.
Or something else.
And so Japan's changing, and
Well,
it's
they say
always
that-
going to change.
Well, they've always been saying that. They will, but not in the way that a lot of people like to think.
Well, that's right, but the changes are coming from the outside, not the
Yeah,
inside.
sure.
And COVID has exacerbated the desire not to have outside influence.
But still, Japan still has the strongest immigration laws in the world.
That's right.
No one's getting
But
in.
who can blame them? If you take the example of the West and what a mess the West has turned out to be, and there's still good things about the West, right?
Sure.
Philanthropy, lots of good people, smart,
There's no doubt about
intelligent,
it. No doubt about
innovation.
it.
But at the same time, we don't have. Well, look at that murder of Bill Bishop.
But see, that's something that I didn't even want to go into. That's so rare. That's such a rarity here.
Yeah,
But in the States, it'd be just.
just another day.
In matter of fact, it wouldn't have made the headlines.
That's right.
It just couldn't.
That's
Even
right.
that violent a murder.
That's right.
But that was such a shock
That's right.
to have that happen in the way the Japanese portrayed it, because they don't emphasize that. It doesn't matter if it's a foreigner or not.
Right.
They don't go into details. They said he was bludgeoned
That's
to
right.
death. We know what really happened.
Well,
We don't know.
Actually,
No, we don't. We don't. But
I've heard a couple of interesting theories.
yeah, so did I.
From women actually, who
Did you?
say they think the guy who murdered him, who was about 40, was rejected by the 38-year-old daughter. And I'm like, well, where is the evidence of that? But they're
Whoa, I
thinking
never heard
it
that.
was a love spat. I'm like, well, wow, where did that come from? You know,
That's interesting.
I don't know. No idea. But
It's
it's
okay,
sad, and
it
it
is
is for,
sad.
especially at the Tokyo American Club here. He was a member, and he was a
He
vibrant
knew him.
member.
He was one of my VPs when I was president of
Yeah.
the American
And I
Chamber.
worked with him too.
Yes.
So going
He
back,
does the DC
sorry,
pronouns.
I
Yeah,
digress.
Yes, we did.
I want to go back to, you asked me what I did after NHK.
Right.
And I realized as a result of the NHK experience, which was wonderful, I became known as an English teacher. And I'm not an English teacher. I don't want to be known as an English teacher. I've got to rechange myself. I've got to re-engineer myself. So what do I do with my background of political science, television, media interest, training? I applied for a job at a company called Gavin Anderson. They had an opening for the head of media and crisis training. And I thought, oh, this is brilliant. This is exactly what I'd be good at doing. It combines all my background. There were 60 applicants. I applied and I got it because my resume was the best. And I went in 2001 and I stayed there for about 14 years doing training all over the world. It was a really wonderful experience. And I'm still doing media and crisis training now, but I've been doing it on my own for 8 years. And I do it all over the world. I used to, in 2019, I was on 36 international flights for work. And now, because of COVID, thank you, COVID, I can do it on Zoom and Teams. I don't have to get on planes anymore. I used to,
You're
come back
traveling
to
all over the
Tokyo, go to Hong Kong for a week, come back to Tokyo, go to Singapore for a week, come back to Tokyo, go to,
And that was
Bengaluru, India.
doing trainings?
Doing media and crisis training. Yeah.
Did you have a team or anyone working
No.
with you? Just all on your own?
No, I kept costs down.
Yeah, most definitely you did.
I don't want mouths to feed.
Right. Okay.
The first 5 people that work for you, you work for them. That's my
That's true.
feeling, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people do it, and they're successful at it. But I just
Yeah.
don't want that level of
Right,
responsibility and that stress
Right.
level.
Right.
And the other thing that's interesting about working on your own is, and my father did the same thing, right? Is you can grow the way you want to grow, and there's only one of you.
That's true.
I used to do freebies at these AmCham lunch events, like the marketing committee would have. And you come in and you do a sample media training, and then I started to realize who's in the audience. PR agencies bringing their people to copy what I'm doing. I stopped doing it. Learning curve, right? The first one we did in 2003, we had a company, I won't name it, that signed up as a result of being hooked by what we did. They loved it. We had a $100,000 contract just from one lunch, right? So it proved to be sort of beneficial, but there was a detrimental side to it.
The fact that they were trying to take what you were doing
Yeah, and
to duplicate it.
In my world, you always got to worry about that. People taking your materials.
Right.
I trained in Korea once. I couldn't believe it. A couple of things about the Koreans that are different than the Japanese. I set up a negotiation with Team A and Team B, and then I left the room to use the bathroom. I came back and they made Team C. They'd like totally changed the scenario of what I was trying to do.
How could they do that?
They just did it on their own. And another incident was, and it's just really interesting, right? I'm not complaining, I'm observing. And the other thing that happened is the head of HR for that company had lunch with another head of HR for another company and gave them my materials. This is the world that we live in. People steal materials, especially when it's online. You can't control it.
Right.
But what you can control in the world that I'm in is you can control what you do and how you do it.
That's right.
It can't replicate me.
That's right.
It can't replicate
That's
you.
right. That's right.
And what you're doing
That's the
with
thing.
these
That's
video
what gives
casts, these
that's what gives
podcasts.
me solace. That's what's giving me solace because people are trying to do that.
Right.
They're trying to, and I'm saying,
You can't.
there's no way because they don't know me and they don't know me. They don't know you.
That's right.
And they have to have the drive. They're just, and it's all greed basically. I think that's what drives it. The greed. They see the dollar or the yen signs.
Okay.
That's what they start thinking about. And I'm saying
Yeah.
that's such a poor way to look at it.
Yeah.
It's so poor.
Well, hungry people look for food.
But they're
You
not
know?
really hungry. They're just being greedy.
Yeah.
They have plenty of food.
Yeah.
We live in a world, as I said before, of abundance.
That's right. Speaking of which, you probably would agree with me because you've spent your life here. This is a land of opportunity, more than the United States. No, it's like I say, this is a great journey. I always grow when I'm in Japan.
So now you're doing most of your work now online.
Most of my work is online, and most of my work is outside Japan.
And
I have contracts, in the Philippines, contracts in Canada, contracts in Singapore, contracts in India.
So how much do you work a month, let's say? If you're working 1 month, how much time do you
Yeah,
devote to
so when I
sitting
was
behind the screen?
53, I decided, here's a story about why I decided to go part-time. I was 53 and I was at the peak of my career with all of the efforts I'd made on my own. And I had 29 days straight of bookings, right? And I was leaving the house at 6 a.m. and coming back at 9 p.m., taking a shower and going to bed. And I did that 29 days, including weekends, in a row. And I said, I can't do this anymore. And on top of it, I had just come back the month earlier from 3 weeks in Singapore. And I came back to my house and there was a spider web on the front door. I said, something's wrong with this picture. And I decided to do a life change. So I've been doing part-time work for close to 10 years now, right? I think we all, hopefully at our age, we reach a point where it's not about saving money, it's about making enough money not to spend it all before you reach the finish line, right?
That's right.
And that's what I'm trying to do. Okay. And I think that COVID has really frightened a lot of people financially, because combined with inflation, it's not easy to retire for most people now. And I look at my father, who worked until 84 because he loved it, but he also loved getting the money. And I think we're all going to keep working, partly keep our brain alive.
I was going to say
and also
so.
We have a lot to give back. You know, it's time to give back when you're our age, right? What have you learned? How can you help people? And I do a lot of volunteer work through media training, like TEL, the support group.
He's a good guy. He's a good guy. I've had him on.
I'm doing some pro bono work for them because I believe in what they're doing, right? And yeah, give back.
That's neat.
Yeah.
David, a question I like to ask people before I end the podcast.
Sure.
And I'm going to have you on several times. I can tell that already.
Yes, you're kind.
And I will. If you could go back in time, when would you go back? If you can give yourself advice, and give yourself advice. When would
in
you
my
go,
lifetime.
In your lifetime.
Because could we go to another lifetime?
No, it'd have to be in your lifetime. And you can't be in the future. It has to be in the past.
Okay.
What advice would you give yourself, and how would you be at the time when you did it?
So it comes back to my feeling, I haven't regretted that my parents didn't give me more guidance as a child, but I would go back to the late teens and make sure that I had more mature influence in my life on how to think about where I'm steering myself and what I could do. It wasn't a mistake what I did, but I think there's a real advantage to getting wisdom from people who have more experience than you. And I think most young people don't want that, because like, well, I know everything. You know, I'm 21, I can make it on my own. But looking back, that's something I think would have been advantageous. Not that I should have been a doctor or a lawyer, but the self-experimentation is a limited window. When you're in university, you got to come out of university and make a living. And you know, studying political science was fine. I followed my passion, I followed my interest, but did it pay the bills? And the answer was no. And the same thing with my mother. She studied intellectual history, got a PhD at age 55, which was part of her problem. She couldn't get a job. So it's really important to be, you know, follow your passion, but also be functional and practical about where you're going. And I think it's hard now. Your kids, I don't know how old they are, they're probably in their 20s.
No, they're in their 30s.
30s. So they're already well along in their career. But you know, coming out of high school and college now, everyone wants to be a coder. Well, not everyone's going to be a coder, and technology is going to take that away anyway. So, you know, how do we look into the future about where the world's going to be? What skill set do we need that's transferable no matter what? I think that's important.
That is so true. Couldn't end on a better note.
Yeah.
David, thank you so much.
It was really good meeting you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Right. All of you watching this podcast, remember, it's all on loan, so continue to reach for the stars, because you're too blessed to be stressed.